You wake up, you go to work, you scroll, you consume, you numb yourself just to do it all again tomorrow. But deep down, something feels off. What if this reality isn't actually yours? What if you've been living inside a system designed to keep you disconnected from your true self? Today, we're discussing the first steps of stepping out of the illusion of life and stepping into the journey of self-fulfillment, the path of Ashla. My name's Michael Perry. I'm joined today with Justin, and this is the new Ashla Podcast. So, today we're going to be talking about the healing journey and what it's like when we start to realize that there are forces outside of ourselves that have been dictating the lives we have led. We're going to be looking at the analogy of the Matrix and how it pertains to real life. You might see this a lot in different healing communities because it's a great representation of what it's like when you start living more authentically and stepping out of your programming. What are your thoughts on this, Justin?
Well, first I'd ask you, what is the matrix? Because I've heard this term used in many different ways. How are we looking at the matrix?
Well, when we look at the Matrix and how it pertains to us, it's the systems that push us along through life. You got societal conditioning, consumerism, fear-based narratives, the ego, all sorts of different things that dictate how we show up and go through life.
Gotcha. So what was your question?
What are your thoughts as the Matrix for an analogy for this journey or stepping out
Right.
of?
Well, back to one of my favorite books, The Four Agreements. It talks about domestication. And domestication, when we think of it in terms of how we domesticate animals, we teach them to kind of live like us, not to make them more comfortable, perhaps, but to make our lives more comfortable. We domesticate, like my puppy dog here. I've trained her to live more like me, right?
Yeah.
Because I want her to understand how to make me comfortable. And that sounds very selfish, but that's just the truth about domestication. We are all domesticated in some way, or the other.
Right. I mean, Pavlov, right?
Yes, yeah, and it's not always good, um, because domestication does tend to set us upon a path of this. It sets us upon a path that is not of our design. Now, we could say, well, children don't know. That may be true as far as society is concerned, how to behave and how to deal with human conflict and deal with manners and decorum and all of these things. But where does that help us as far as being free or being authentic? Domestication, and that's what I think you're kind of going with this matrix, and that's kind of where I'm looking at it from. It's just the domestication
It's a
of
good word to encompass the whole picture because
it
it's
is.
true. We're domesticated into a way of living. You look at circus trained elephants and their legs are tied to a table when they're young where they can't break free. And as they get older, that same rope is tied to that same table. And even though they're big enough that they could rip the whole tent down, they are
Yeah,
conditioned to believe that they can't move that table.
right. I've seen elephants do some crazy stuff in videos, and I know
Yeah.
they can pull a table. Right. No, that's a perfect analogy to what I'm talking about. Now, is it bad? I don't think it's inherently bad because as we discussed in our most recent show that hit today, the dance of ego and spirit, the ego is important and it must be trained for us to survive in this environment, in these communities that we live in
Right? Well, we need
society as a
structure.
whole. Yes. So they are good in that they help us, for the most of us, if we're raised in a more healthy way, to survive in society and to be able to interact and to be able to take care of ourselves at some point. Domestication, when we get to a point in our journey in life, domestication starts to create problems for many of us.
Well, and I got a good word to sort of hone in on this. When we look at paradigms, it is our focused view of how things are supposed to work. And one of the greatest analogies I've ever heard for paradigms, especially when it comes to how important a shift in your understanding of things can be, there was a captain. This was in the seven habits of highly effective people. And examining your paradigms is one of the first habits in that book.
That's a good book too, by the way.
That was the first self-help book I ever read.
It's a good one.
It really is. And there's this captain who is sailing in a giant battleship going head first, and he sees a light out in the distance, and he calls to the ship ahead. And he's like, "You need to change course. I'm in a giant battleship. I can't maneuver as easily as you probably can. Please change your course." And he keeps crying out, getting more and more frustrated as he's reaching out to this ship. And finally, the ship chimes in and says, "I'm a lighthouse. I can't move."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was the paradigm had shifted for that captain. I have to move because that is the only thing that's going to stop us from colliding.
Yeah, with the Earth. Not
Yeah,
gonna win. Not gonna win that battle.
not going to win that. Take it from the Titanic and ice. Rock
Right.
ain't going to do any better.
Yeah. Yeah. Rock beats boat every time. I don't care how big the boat is. Rock beats boat.
Every time.
Well, and when we're talking about this matrix, this domestication, at some point it does disconnect us from our authenticity, from our authentic selves. Because much of this domestication is fear based or reward based, or if you act this way enough, I will reward you. And that may not be what you want to do, it may not be you authentically, but you go along with it because we all want reward because that's better than punishment
Or safety.
or safety.
I mean, you look at a lot of us, there's so many people that ended up being caretakers for their own parents in their youth because that's what they needed to do in those times. I
Right.
mean, they didn't need to, but it's the role they filled in order to create a symbiotic relationship in the house. And it's nothing to judge yourself for, or to judge your kid for it. They did that for you, but it's the domestication of learning I need to sacrifice my needs to assist the others to make sure everything runs properly. And then that system gets carried into your adult life without you ever realizing it. You're people pleasing, you're doing all you can, trying to control every aspect because you feel like you are responsible for homeostasis in the world.
Right. And it's really clever that you connect this to the matrix, what we're talking about here, because most of this is programmed into us. And this takes us back to our show that hit today, the dance between ego and spirit. Because as we grow, and I think you and Derek touched upon this too in the show that you guys did, where through this domestication, we empower the ego over spirit. We empower the ego over truth. We empower the ego above all else because the ego is what brings us comfort as we're growing, as we're maturing into adults from
Well, let me
children.
ask you this. Could the ego be these systems? Could the ego be these narratives and creations that we run on in life?
I think the ego is more like Agent Smith, to be honest with you. Because think about this, and you can speak to this because you started this journey roughly a year and a half, 2 years ago. And a lot of our work together started off with removing the falsehoods and corruption from your ego. Not removing it, not destroying it, certainly, because it's important. The Matrix needs an Agent Smith to make sure that the program is running without corruption, without creating a problem.
I'm liking this analogy.
Right? So the ego is Agent Smith. Because think back to when you started your shadow work. And it was, as we talked about in the show, the Ego and Spirit show, where it does become somewhat of a battle between Neo and Agent Smith. But
Yeah.
and spoiler alert for anyone who still hasn't seen the Matrix trilogy, it's only been out for like 40 years or something. Maybe 20, I don't know. Been out for a long time. But in the end, they find harmony between the system and Neo. They find harmony between the Matrix and humanity. And they find harmony between, what Agent Smith, who was corrupted, who doesn't start out corrupted, but gets corrupted. And there's a harmonization between what Neo is and what Agent Smith is. So I think the ego is not the Matrix itself, but it is certainly an important part of what keeps the Matrix running. And that would be, in this analogy, Agent Smith.
Right. So how would you say these systems, these programs, this domestication that we have gone through in life, how does this disconnect us from our true selves?
It disconnects us because the needs of the whole outweigh the needs of the self or the individual. We talk a lot about interconnectedness on this path, and interconnectedness is important, but it's also important to understand that we are individuals who play a part in the greater whole, in the greater web of existence. Where these things start to hurt our personal truth or our individuality. Our special role in this is that the system as a whole, it seeks to make sure that it always survives, and
Yes.
sometimes that means that the individual is lost or the individual is sacrificed against their will, against their beliefs, against their truths. And they have trouble finding that because the system fights to keep us more part of the system because it may be afraid that we are going to buck the system or we're going to. And many of us find harmony within these things we're talking about. I can certainly I can certainly go along with society and be a part of it and be productive and do all this stuff, but I also keep my truths and my beliefs, and all the things that I practice and teach are also important to me. So I think that's what happens. The system tries to protect itself from rogue actors, if you will.
Well, I mean, you look at things like ego death, which I think is one of the most misunderstood topics out there. Anyone who claims they've had ego death and their ego no longer rules them is probably tooting their own horn. Ego
Well,
death,
now they have spiritual ego. So what's
yeah.
worse?
Yeah.
There's always these levels of ego. When there's a meme that I share every year when it comes along and I see it again, it shows a guy who is on a really high plateau or something, like a piece of earth or dirt. And, he's got his arms outstretched and he is destroying the ego and he's going to fall off of ego to be done with it. But little does he realize that he doesn't fall very far before he falls on a big old another piece of dirt that's now spiritual ego,
Yeah.
because you need it.
Yeah, well, and I think ego death in itself, the misunderstood term, ego death is when parts of our ego, parts of our programming start to
Hmm.
fade away. I
Right.
mean, the process of individuation, which is a single word I'd use to explain what the journey is. When the ego is up against a wall and can no longer present reality in the way that kept you safe before, when it knows that it's got the light on it and it can't keep showing up in the world the way it does, it fights like hell.
It
It will
does.
do everything it can to make you stay in your patterns, the matrix. And individuation happens when it's up against that wall and you decide that this part of you no longer serves you, that it's not a bad part, that it has served you well in the past, it's kept you safe,
Kept you
but it's
alive.
time to release it. Yeah, because none of these parts, when we talk about shedding parts of ourselves, when we talk about shadow work and finding things hidden within us, none of the parts within us, none of this is bad. There is no good or bad in this. It is just what the cards you have been dealt to make it through life and survive to the point you are. They kept you safe. They kept you living up until now, so be grateful for them. But it's also releasing these parts that you soon realize are nothing but faulty systems trying to keep you stuck in the same old, same old. Because there's nothing that our ego craves more than being able to expect, being able to, what's the word I'm looking for here, Justin? Being able to predict.
Yeah,
The ego likes predictability, and your
it
ego
does.
will pick a
Because that
familiar hill.
directly, well, that directly ties into our survival.
Yeah,
We develop patterns of perception out in the wild where we know what a particular sound is. It's either lunch or predator. We know what a certain smell is like. We know what certain patterns of animals, we know the patterns they take. We know the patterns of the weather. We know all these things because those are survival. Those are
yeah,
good for survival. They're necessary for survival. Now,
100%.
the ego isn't just a survival thing, because we don't survive the same way. Most of us don't anyway. We don't survive the same way as our ancestors did.
We don't survive the same way our parents did. We are an
Exactly.
amalgamation of our experiences and understanding. And that is what this program is. And it is different, brother to sister, father to son.
Yes. And that's where that domestication comes from, and that's where it gets kind of wonky, because all our parents know is how to teach us how they survived and how they navigated society.
Yeah,
And all these things, these political climates and these economic climates and the climate, right? It all changes. And then you and I have kids, and then we teach them and kind of domesticate them from a point of view where we were at and where we are at. So
right. Well, and this comes back to, I mean, we talk a lot about looking at your childhood and understanding there's some faulty program that stems from that. It's never about blame. It's never about judging your parents for what they did, because more often than not, your parents did the best job they could. That or they were severely mentally ill. I
mhm,
mean, it is when we have kids, it is impossible to be a perfect parent. And if you strive for that, I guarantee you're going to mess them up more than if you did let go. It's about being able to, children need structure. And that is the parent's job to fulfill, is to create that structure.
Right.
And the only structure they have is the structure they got from their parents and their own experiences, and so on and so forth. That's why a lot of this work you see a lot in the healing community, breaking generational trauma and breaking
Generational
free from
traumas.
family patterns. I mean, it's
Yep.
crazy how when you start doing this work, you start to see these patterns. My father, he was a valedictorian. He was the quarterback for the football team. He did all he could to impress his parents, and his dad never really noticed him because his dad came from a life that was less privileged. So he became a carpenter, and he was able to provide all these things for his kids and give them the life he thought that the life he wanted. He gave his kids, and he ended up neglecting all the work my dad put in to show that he was a good, hardworking man. And when he had me, my dad never felt seen or valued for who he was doing these things. My dad was like, all right, my son's going to be in 3 to 4 sports teams at a time all throughout his childhood. And then when I started not really enjoying sports and when I kind of fell to the wayside there, when I wasn't an A student, I was into making random tidbits online and all these other things that really weren't his type of interest. He ended up invalidating my experience,
Mm-hmm.
passing on that same trauma in his own way, all through trying to validate his experience through me.
Right.
And that might be a mess of understanding, but it was just a great example of how generational patterns happen. And when we do this work, when we break this domestication, we begin to heal from the illusion. We begin stepping into our authenticity and in turn teach our children to do the same.
Well, and I tried, but I failed a few times, I'm sure, with my children because I had some of those issues before too. And it just we do pass this stuff on, and we try not to. But I think the
We're
most
human.
important thing. What's that?
We're human. Life
We are.
happens, and it's all about rolling with the punches. You can't give that perfect life because sometimes everyone may need to work 2 jobs. Sometimes things are tight and you can't follow through on the promises you desperately wanted to keep.
Yeah. But the important thing is that we have time to grow, and they can watch us grow, and we get better as we go along.
Yeah.
We get better as we go along, and that's what's important. As we become more authentic, our children see that as they and unfortunately sometimes they don't see it until they are adults. But they're still always watching us. We're still always kind of we may not be directly influencing their lives anymore, but indirectly. And this is what we do for others when we walk this path and we serve our fellow man. Someone's always watching there too. We may not plant the seeds within the subject that we are working with, but somebody's watching.
Yeah.
That's why, our grandparents are always better father and mother figures in ways than our parents were because our grandparents had all that extra time to grow, right?
Right. Well, they learn to let go, right?
In a lot of ways, I'm probably a better grandfather than I was a father, especially in the early days when I was a young father. But I'm a much better grandfather to my grandchildren than I was as they're little than I was to my little kids.
Right.
And like you said, there's nothing about this is good or bad. It just seems to be the cycles that we as humans experience.
Right. Well, and realistically, when we look at these times in our lives, whether it's your parents or yourself you're looking at, you did the best job you could with the tools you had. And that is one of the most important mantras you can have on this journey, especially in self reflection. You did the best you could with the tools you had.
People ask me a lot for advice, how to raise kids. And that's pretty much the advice I give them. Just do the best you can. Make sure you feed them, make sure you water them, make sure they have shelter and clothes and so they can be warm, and teach them how to navigate situations and problems as best you can, but just show up. Most of the work, just show up as best you can. And every day,
Amen to that.
and sometimes they're disappointed. I was like, oh, I thought you'd have better advice. That is the best advice I can give you for that. Just show up and do the best you can. And your best is going to be different every day. We say that a lot around here, but it's true because we don't want you to beat the crap out of yourself every day because you didn't show up at 100%.
And if you're trying to hide it all, most likely your kids are going to pick up on that.
Well, and if they don't, but they probably will, you're going to be super stressed out and you're going to be super anxious and you're going to be dealing with a lot of inner turmoil and a lot of inner disharmony. And that shows. Whether you think you're hiding it well or not, it shows.
What it creates such unrealistic standards too for how they feel they need to be in life. I lost my grandfather at the age of 4, and I was there when he died. And one of the biggest reasons I ended up going into special ed and suffered through depression my whole childhood is because I saw everyone else dealing with this death, but not in the way I was. Everyone was being stoic through it. And I get it, they were being strong, they were doing what they thought was best. But I felt weak. And I tried to internalize that sadness. And it created all these issues later on because emotions need to go somewhere or they become internalized. It is energy, and energy doesn't just dissipate.
No, it just transforms into something else. And sometimes we can choose through our works and through our perception and through our training and through the path that we set before ourselves, we can choose how that manifests.
Yeah.
Think if you asked 100 people if they got a bum deal in life starting out, or if they had a bad childhood or whatever, everybody, all but probably two of them, would say, my childhood was this, or my childhood, but it's always something, if not bad, at least a little negative, because we all have something going on. And we all have those, as you said, general, maybe two out of those 100 would say, you know what? I had an awesome childhood. And that doesn't mean that the other 98 had bad parents or bad upbringings. It's about that perspective. And every human being that's born, every human being, I'll say, that hit that lottery, every 1 in 400 trillion or whatever it is, I believe, comes with some kind of generational stuff from the past lives or things like that in a way. And I know people are going to go, oh God, here he goes, all woo woo. Well, I can't come to grips with it any other way, because it seems like people come with stuff. Each person comes with a pre-wired personality. Each person comes with preset needs that nobody ever tells us they need, and you have to find it through living with them.
Right.
All of my children, and I try not to talk about my children too much on these podcasts, but I'll tell you this: as a father, I have 5 children, and they're all 5 different people. And this isn't an excuse to some of my shortcomings as a father, but without an instruction man, it's like having 5 alien machines in front of you with no way, nobody told you how to activate it or how to use it properly or how to properly maintain or meet their needs or whatever. You have to figure that stuff out. So some of this stuff comes pre-wired and you don't know where it comes from. I guess perhaps it comes from the factory with wiring that is from another person way far down your bloodline, perhaps even. I don't know. I'm not trying to prove or disprove this one way or the other. That's just the way it is. People come different with different needs and different desires, and different attitudes and different perspectives and different personalities that no matter the environment you provide, you may not be providing for their exact needs. And then that causes struggle.
And the same goes for you who is listening. You came with different needs and different things that cultivated your experience and how you needed to show up in life to feel safe and to survive.
Yes.
Good environment or not, that is what we do as people. It is how we work. We are constantly adapting to everything around us.
Yeah. I mean, beyond the basics, everybody needs food, everybody needs water, everybody needs shelter, everybody needs protection from the elements or from other people or from just the wilderness or whatever. But there are so many other deep-seated needs that, number one, they can't express to you because they don't know how to express that because they're little, they're children. And we can't possibly know every one of their deeper needs. So this is some of the problem of the domestication, right?
Yeah.
And this is why it's important to deprogram that. Not completely. I haven't completely abandoned my upbringing, but I've certainly reprogrammed some of it, a lot of it, perhaps.
Well, you hear all the time, I mean, the healing journey is not one that you take 5, 10 years out of your life and, oh, you're all better. This is a lifelong practice because you're changing your very nature that you have cultivated for your entire life. This is no small feat. Again, that book I recommended in the last episode, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. That is what you are doing. You are breaking the habit of being yourself because you start to realize what your personal truths are and recognizing what are programmed beliefs. What are things that have been pushed on you to help you see the world in the simplest way possible? I mean, one of the greatest teachings I ever heard was a lot of the times when you have different negative thoughts, very often, depending on your upbringing, if you listen to those voices in your head, you might be able to correlate them to something someone said to you years before. And it's someone else's voice in your head because it's just a program that you decided to take on and make an agreement, to make it a belief.
Hmm.
Because that's what so much of this is it's personal beliefs you have created within yourself to help you understand the world as effectively as possible. And it's changing personal beliefs are so much more difficult said than done because they are ingrained in you, spirit, mind, and body. It's taking these and purifying them, helping them find truth, helping them find authenticity. And it doesn't mean trying to conform each one to how it fits, but trying to find what is your own personal truth, what is your own authentic feelings, emotions, your own authentic understanding of how things should be.
Well, we do a lot of agreeing to expectations as we're raised, as we're grown. Expectations that we necessarily don't really want to. But again, this goes back to, well, if you want to be safe, if you want to be rewarded, if you want to be more happy than not, then we sign away our right to bind ourselves to these expectations from all different sides. Not a whole lot of boundary work being performed, not a whole lot of boundary work being taught. It's just, look, this is how it is in society. Look, this is how it is. This is how we hear that a lot. This is how it is. And as we're growing, we sometimes we're conscious of this. I can remember times where I agreed to certain expectations that I thought were stupid. I thought were dumb. I didn't want to do anything like that. It didn't make sense to me. But because I wanted that cookie, but because I wanted to be important in the eyes of the people I loved, I just did it.
Right? Well, I mean, another book I read a while back called The Courage to Be Disliked, and it talked about how when we look at trauma, and I don't care who you are, we all have trauma just in our own degrees.
Hmm.
And trauma is never what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us. But all trauma is intrapersonal trauma. It is how someone made us feel, how we felt when we made someone react a certain way. It is all of these conditioning that we go through is all about how to handle our interpersonal relationships. And that's because when we start living more authentically, that's when we start shifting from looking outside for external validation to internal validation. And that's what personal truth is. It is learning to feel whole within yourself and not from the outside. Whether you're chasing material possessions, you're chasing status or relationships, that's all driven by the matrix. That is this programming. But when you learn to give yourself these things, you begin to value yourself more, value your opinions more, and in turn, value other people's opinions. You may not agree, but you're no longer taking on criticism, but as food for thought, to have discussions instead of debates,
Hmm.
because you're strong enough in your own sense of self, but also flexible enough to accept that you are not perfect and you don't know everything. I mean, that was Socrates' greatest teaching, right? I
Yeah.
know nothing.
I know that I know nothing.
So, would you say some signs are that you are living a matrix based life?
Well, they're all pretty common. We feel this void, many of us, that no matter what we try to put into it, it just seems like, and this is often described as filling these voids with material things, money, houses, relationships, to try and fill that gap, fill that void. But it's difficult to do because that void could be as infinite as the universe. You're just throwing stuff into it and it never seems to fill because you're not really doing much introspection at this phase. You're not really facing yourself, as we'll talk about shadow work and talking about using our intuition and stuff. We'll get to that in a second, but we're trying to fill this gap, this void. And you can learn 1,000 religions and never find peace. You can buy 1,000 things and never find peace. You can have 1,000 relationships, even 1,000 romantic relationships, and still never find love. So that's really the big one. I think really what happens to most people is they kind of hit what we call this rock bottom. They've tried everything. They've went to gurus, they've gone to therapists, they've gone to the ends of the earth, and finally they hit rock bottom.
I completely agree with that, though, because unfortunately, most people don't start the journey until they are in the darkness. When all of a sudden, the way they've been going through life is no longer working for them. When you hit that rock bottom, you realize that the battles you've been fighting and the way you've been going about trying to get your needs met isn't working for you anymore. That something greater is required from you. I know for me, in the heart of my darkness, it was like I could feel that there were things I wasn't seeing in the way I was showing up in life, but the way I was showing up in life was draining me. I was feeling unfulfilled. I was feeling neglected. I was feeling unloved. And I realized it's because that's exactly how I felt about myself. Because in those moments, I only had myself. And I had to reevaluate, what am I doing with my life right now? What am I doing with myself right now?
Hmm.
I can't keep showing up the way I am, or it's just going to lead to more chaos and turmoil. And
Yeah,
so
you kind of have to get to that point where you're just finally sick of it, and that happens at different points for different people.
I heard
Everybody,
a term a while back. I love it. It's just, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's exactly what we're talking about. Hitting that rock bottom per se.
Another sign you might be in this matrix is, do you feel any calling in life? Do you feel like life has gotten stagnant? Do you feel like you are doing work that is fulfilling to you and your character? I think a lot of us struggle with this, and that was a big thing for me. Is I felt like I wandered aimlessly for years, and I knew I was good with people. I knew I liked working with people, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself. I thought about sales, but I realized, just thinking about it makes me cringy. And as I started pursuing this path, you'll notice as you do this work, as you start to discover what your shadows are, the magic's always in the work you're avoiding most. And in doing this work with myself that I had pushed off for my entire life, I found so much passion and fulfillment in it. And that's what brought me into life coaching and now doing this podcast. And who knows where it'll go from here, but I know if I follow my passion, God, the universe, it's going to meet me halfway. It's going to present opportunities as long as I'm willing to keep persevering with my drive to help others on this path.
Yeah. I'm going to share a quote with everyone that I like to put in my books because it recenters me to what I'm trying to accomplish. On the edge of your awareness is a silhouette, an intermittent echo of a spiritual and philosophical stirring taking place within you. Perhaps it has always been there, or maybe it is only recently that you've begun to notice it. But one thing is certain, you can no longer avoid or ignore it. You have heard the call, and you have felt the pull of an unknown force that has been trying to wake you from a long and deep spiritual slumber. You can no longer turn away from this force that moves you in the direction of personal development and philosophical betterment. Nothing happens without reason or purpose. Your search and our presence, the union of both, is not luck or chance. It is providence. You know who said that?
Who said that? That's good.
My teacher, my master, Derek Thompson.
Oh, wow.
It's the calling. And his words echo this deep and sacred truth of the heart of a true explorer. You just talked about stagnation, feeling stuck, feeling trapped, no matter what you do. It's time to become an explorer.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Right?
And there's so much truth to that. I mean, a lot of being stuck, and I've seen this with so many people, especially ones I've helped. It's that, again, we crave a familiar hell over the unknown. And so many people have great personalities, have a great character, but they don't want to put themselves out there. I mean, part of finding your passion, I truly believe, resides in putting yourself in different environments, trying new things, experimenting, to go explore, like you're saying. Because when we do that, we end up meeting like minded people. We end up being presented with opportunities that could align with something greater than we could ever imagine. Reaching out to you just because I started doing shadow work, like we've talked about philosophy. I had no idea if you knew what shadow work was, and you're like, "No, I know quite a bit. Let's meet together and talk about it." And it was taking that risk, reaching out, and then meeting up that led to going into training and has now led to this. I mean,
I'll share with everyone else the question I asked you, which is also the question I ask every potential student. What are you looking for? What are you looking
yeah.
for? Not how can I help you? Not go meditate. Not it's what are you looking for? Do you know what you're looking for and do you know where to find it? That's the first question. And that isn't meant to be some kind of mystical wizardry,
Yeah.
some no, it's an actual question. What are you looking for?
I remember my answer too. It was truth. I
Well,
wanted to understand myself better. I wanted to
well,
understand.
you're in the right place, my friend.
Yeah.
When I ask people, what are you looking for? Talking about something deeper, more profound on not just a spiritual level, but a mental level and a physical level, because people will come to me for different reasons. What are you looking for? And I'm talking about those deep things inside of a person, the potential. Everybody has that. As we talked about, a lot of us start off this journey feeling kind of, like I said, that void really deep down, like something isn't there that's supposed to be. So off we go, looking here and looking there. We check this place and that. We look for the strange and mysterious thing that is missing. We seek out others to help us look or tell us what we're missing. That's not the exploration I'm talking about. That is kind of you're looking for things to justify your disharmonious existence. When we talk about exploring, becoming an explorer, look for things outside of these beliefs that you're so attached to. Now, a Christian will go to a priest or a preacher looking for God or perhaps communion with Jesus. A Jew will go to a rabbi to help them find God. A Padawan or an apprentice will enlist a master to show them where the force is hiding. The answer, of course, is simple. You're looking in the wrong place. Now, before I continue, I'm going to ask you, where is the right place to look? And there are no wrong answers.
Within,
Within.
I do think that our intuition, when we are acting out of alignment with ourselves, we know it. Even if it's a subtle feeling, a subtle knowing, there's always that pull when we are acting out of alignment with our true nature, with our true authenticity. I think back to that relationship I was in for 7 years, and my intuition was always telling me, you don't need this. This is not your responsibility. And I kept shoving it down like, nope, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to make this work. And I think that's one of the first steps within leaving the matrix is learning to listen to that inner voice, to listen to that intuition, to start really getting inside yourself and learning the cues of your body. Anxiety can be a strong message, but if interpreted wrong, can lead you to a whole bunch of headache.
You must learn to deal with Agent Smith. You have to. You have to. Agent Smith is going to trip you up and try to stop you from reaching that next level because Agent Smith is afraid that you're going to abandon him. And you're
Yeah,
not. You're just going to teach Agent Smith how to better protect you and how to
right.
align with your purpose and align with your authenticity. So you have to search in the place that you forgot existed. You said inside yourself, which is a good. I'm going to do a little off the cuff exercise here. All right.
Okay.
I want you to sit upright, quietly and comfortably. Take several deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. Take your left hand, cup it over your breastbone. And rest your hand there. Just leave it there. And we're going to go just to the left of our breastbone, in fact. Now take your right hand and cup it over your left hand. Now sit quietly for another moment. Can you feel that?
Yeah.
Can you feel that steady beat? That is the doorway to a forgotten place, a place where there are no questions, only answers. If you want to find God, Jesus, Buddha, the Force, or the truest version of yourself, the most authentic version of yourself, knock on the door and walk inside. That's where this stuff is hiding.
God, that's good. I mean, they talk about how there's more neurons in your heart than even in your brain. And there's creating, through science, they're finding so many connections to the nervous system in between the two and how they communicate. And when they're out of harmony, it creates inner chaos.
And it creates physical problems, it creates
Yeah.
disease. I don't know, have I ever mentioned the Heart Math book to anyone on the show? I think I may have. Heart Math, what Michael's talking about right now, is literally something you can learn right now by listening or reading the Heart Math book. It talks about this stuff. It talks about all of what we're talking about. In fact, those neurons, there are brain cells, literal brain cells. Well, not literal brain cells, but the brains.
Neurons to be specific.
Yeah, let me restate that. Neurons in the heart, but also in the gut. You get that weird feeling? That's your gut thinking. Then warning you.
The
What develops first in a human being, Michael? The heart or the brain? And
heart.
if you don't know, look it up. The heart.
Well, it's just like you think about character and how the most defining moments for people are when it's matters of the heart, whether it's great love or great pain.
We don't feel it in our brain. We feel it in our heart. And if the heart is the first thing that develops in a human being, that should tell you something. Then it is the heart that is the manager for the rest of the growth of the body. At least that's what it means to me. I can't come to any other conclusion. If the heart is first, then the heart is smartest. The heart, with its neurons and brain-like activity, without a brain, so that's where the stuff is hiding. That's where the answers are. And we all have access to the answers. Sometimes we just need to find somebody to help us find the door and open it, or encourage us enough to open it. Nobody knows better than you at the end of the day.
Right. Well, I'd say most people listening have started this journey or are beginning it. And we all go through, and it's usually in our darkest moments, this profound moment of realization. This moment where we start to question our own reality and our own understandings. If you're looking for the first step, that's the first step.
Right. I'll kind of end my little tirade with this. A priest, a preacher, a rabbi, a monk, a guru, a master, they can only show you a path. They can only kind of point you in a direction. They can provide you with knowledge and instruction on particular subject or faith or belief. They can teach you how to pray, meditate, form rites and rituals. They can empower you with stories and teachings. They can provide you with advice and counsel from their points of view. But none of them can take you to God directly. None of them can take you to heaven. None of them can show you where to find paradise or the forest. A teacher can only really take you to a door and maybe even help you unlock it and open it. But it is you who must step through that threshold.
Yeah.
It is you that must take that, maybe not a leap of faith, but a step of faith. I can only bring Michael to a sunrise in all its glory, but only he can describe what it looks like.
Oh, that's a good analogy. Yep. And realistically, one of the other things is we talk about how we're all conditioned differently. We all operate from these different paradigms. I mean, no journey, no matter how like it may seem on the outside, no journey is the same. And you will find as you traverse the path slowly, you will get to a point where there is no path. Because if you're following someone else's path, you're living out of authenticity. You're living out of authenticity and not inauthenticity. Because your path will be different. So your guides, your mentors, your teachers, they open the door, they show you a path, and it's up to you to create the map that is your journey.
You are the master and architect of your inner temple. I would advise you, with all of my heart, to build this temple with an intended purpose,
And to
authentically,
respect it.
and erect each pillar on a solid foundation. Whatever philosophy you fall into, or belief patterns, or whatever, make sure that it's one that can be practiced effortlessly eventually. Your practice must lead to right action and truth, and you must ultimately walk your path only as you can.
Yeah. And once you know better, do better.
And once you know better, do better. I'm very fond of saying that. I love that phrase.
It's so true, though. I mean, again, I've talked about a ton on this podcast about how I spent my life trying to be the hero. And I thought I was doing the just and right thing. And yes, I did the best I could with the tools I had. But once I gained the perspective of one, this was how I was getting my needs met. This was how I felt love was obtained. And then I started looking at when you're saving people, like the codependency, saving people from the consequences of their actions. By doing so, I never allowed them to grow, to learn, to be more, because only in the face of adversity, when we do hit the bottom, when we are not saved from our actions, can we truly start climbing our way out of the hell that we have created for ourselves. Because I guarantee you, if you're someone who has been constantly given a cushion under your butt every time you fell, or you're the one putting the cushion there, both you and that person's life are in hell, because there's no growth when there's no accountability.
Well, and you're learning to fear everything because
Yeah.
you're not learning that not everything that seems bad is bad.
Right. Well said.
So I want to pick your brain a little bit about this awakening.
Okay.
What what is an awakening for those who may not be familiar with that? It's an important piece to this escaping this reality, this matrix, as you call it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of like I said earlier, it's that moment of realization
Mm.
when you start to question your understanding of how the world, how reality work. Again, we operate from these paradigms, this domestication. And when we get into this dark place and we realize this approach we have to life is no longer serving us, that is the first step in awakening, that dark night of the soul. That moment where you realize that these parts of you that have kept you safe need to be shed so you can become more, so you can evolve, so you can grow beyond yourself. Or better said, grow into yourself. Because often the biggest thing these masks do in our adult lives is keep us as far away from ourselves as we can be because we're afraid to look in the mirror. We must show grace and compassion when we start to do this work. It is so difficult to admit our faults, our failings, to know that we've messed up in many ways, and to not only take that accountability, but to love ourselves despite that. And I think it's this realization of the masks we've been wearing when we finally realize there's something underneath it. That is awakening.
I have a follow-up question.
All right?
These many systems of religions, of life paths, philosophies, they all tout that they can take you to enlightenment and awakening. Can these two things only be found within these certain systems?
No, I don't think they're necessary to obtain it. I think they're great resources and it's the best way to go about it because the messages are there, the lessons you're looking for are there.
Hmm.
Joseph Campbell, who is a hero of mine. This man is the one who came up with the hero's journey, which is the message in all stories dating all the way back to Egypt to now. And it's the journey of initiation, fighting, or initiation, hardship, fighting for what you believe in, evolving, becoming more, and then returning home. You look in all history and you see the mirror of humanity within the deities of old. You look at Norse mythology where you have Loki the trickster. We all have the trickster within us. You look at Thor, who is what would Thor represent?
Depends on what Thor you're talking about.
Yeah, right.
There is a newer Thor set forth by Marvel Comics.
All Nordic Thor.
Nordic Thor, yeah. Not everything about Thor is good. Oh,
No, there's humanity within each of the gods as you
there
listen
is.
to their stories.
As if they walked the earth with humanity.
Yeah. But to get back to your question, I do believe that they're an invaluable resource to go on this journey, whatever faith you choose, but they aren't necessary.
Right.
So I think the most effective way is to go out in nature and forage on your own. And
Yeah, you better take some wisdom with you. Better know how to
yeah,
do that. Eat the wrong thing.
you either live a little or you learn a little, right?
Right. These two concepts, and a lot of people will say they're the same thing, enlightenment and awakening. Just in case you see them as separate, I think it's situational for me, but that's besides the point. These two concepts are not exclusive to any single belief system or religion. These two concepts have nothing to do, per se, with a system of beliefs or religions in of themselves. Although these concepts that we're talking about, as you said, are usually attributed to these things because their general practices provide these building blocks and these skills that you learn that are or that exist to bring you to that. So they are an invaluable resource for sure. But I believe that anyone can start to discover enlightenment or awakening in their day-to-day lives simply by being open and willing to surrender their hardened and fixed ideas, to give up some of their egoic basic desires, their inflexible beliefs. I believe the key to transforming is found in the awareness and openness to possibilities, opportunities all around you. And where does awareness begin for this process? Well, it begins in an inspired mind who's ready to move, who's ready to explore, that's always open to new possible ideas. People from all walks of life experience these awakenings all the time. And this goes back to your point about intuition. Oftentimes when this awakening starts to knock, we just ignore it. But when that awakening starts to pound on the door like an angry police officer, that's when we start to pay more attention. And sometimes we get knocked on our butt and we hit rock bottom. That forces us to open our hearts and open our minds to all of these possibilities.
No, and that's such a good point to bring up in this because that I feel is one of the many things the universe does. We are constantly attracting the same situations in our lives. And I feel it's a spiritual thing because we attract these situations not because we deserve to be in horrible relationships or we deserve to be destitute, but it's because it's a calling. It is a calling to evolve beyond these wounds, these understandings. And like Justin said, it starts at a knock on the door. But then you don't answer. Then it starts pounding. Then they kick the door in. And you don't listen long enough. There's going to be a hurricane that comes through and wipes out your house.
Yeah, it's going to drag you one way or the other. You could go, or it'll drag you kicking and screaming sometimes.
Rock bottom looks different for everyone.
It does. It really does. Like I said before, we don't all start at the same spot on the track. Some of us start a little closer to success and enlightenment. Others start at the way back.
Yeah. One thing to touch on here when we look at success, success isn't financial goods or social stature. Success is abundance. And abundance is fulfillment in life with family, with waking up every day glad to be living the life you're living. And yeah, there will be hard times, there will be even worse times, but you will know you have things under control. You will have faith that all things are working out.
What was it you said before?
Right, yeah. We A strong character and an easy life cannot coexist. The cost of one is the other. There we go. That's a good point to bring into this.
Well, it is because, as you said, abundance is different than being rich or having a lot of things. And look, I will say this, having lots of money, having lots of things isn't necessarily a bad thing either. This is where me and my fellows often clash as well, because a lot of these teachings that we see in the mainstream almost feel like they're designed to make you feel like it's okay to be poor and destitute. Well, it's not. You need to thrive. You need to have a good life. But where that comes from is this bigger picture type of idea where you're looking for abundance, and that's abundance in love, abundance in, help me out here. Abundance isn't just money, and
Love was such a good one though, because it's such an all-encompassing thing.
it is.
But it's abundance in life. They talk about this term called following your bliss. And when you're living in bliss, it doesn't mean you're necessarily eating all the greatest foods or you're driving a Rolls Royce down the road. But following your bliss means you are ecstatic in your life. You are living what brings your soul joy,
Yes.
whether that is coming home to a family full of love or it's going and traveling all around the world. And that's not for everyone as much as media would like you to pretend that's the life you want to have.
Right. And that's the point I was getting to, because it can be driving the Rolls Royce on the 101 freeway. It can be, if that brings you authentic contentment and authentic peace.
There's a
What
good
Mike
word too,
Well,
contentment.
what you're talking about is the things that we chase because we're presented with this idea that this is the happy life. This is what you have to have a happy life. That's not the same for everyone.
Right.
But it could be to have, enough resources where you don't have to stress about bills, or having enough food so you're never hungry. It could be simple things or it could be grand things. But the important part of when we're talking about abundance and joy, you have to have authentic contentment and authentic peace in your life. That's when you know that you are abundant. And that's going to be different for every single person. If I
That's
had
so good.
at
Contentment
20
and
million in the
peace.
bank right now, I'd still be living in my little house that I live in right now, because I love this house. Not because it has things or because it is a thing, but because that is my authentic contentment. I don't need a huge house or whatever. But maybe some person out there does, and that's nothing wrong with that. This is where we get tripped up. So media says that this is, having 10 cars, or I'm obviously exaggerating here, but they do paint us a picture of what they think is a perfect life. And it's not true for everyone. It may not be true for anyone. But on the other side of things, we have spiritual leaders and gurus and whatever who will tell us that you need to learn to be happy being poor and without and lacking. No, like everything else we do around here, you must find that happy medium, that center, that balance that's right for you. We can't tell you exactly the perfect life to live to find that authentic contentment and authentic joy and that authentic peace. But I promise you, if you start to investigate that, you're going to find that it's going to be different for you than it is for me or Michael or anyone else listening.
No. Well, and it's like as you start on this journey, don't be looking for, all right, I'm going to know what my bliss is. This is kind of full circle to what we were talking about earlier. Go on an adventure, go explore, go through life like you pretend you have no idea what it is that you want and just try new things. See what your spirit is called to. Because you will feel it. Think of those times where you went and did some crazy big activity, and afterwards you didn't feel drained, you didn't feel tired, you felt exalted. Learn to experience life, and slowly you will find out what those things are that is your bliss, that brings you peace and contentment. Go discover who you are.
Yeah, and this is why, from our teachings at our temple, we teach and encourage the practice of meditation, contemplation, purposeful and honest self-reflection. We try to guide people to delve into the depths of their hearts and their minds so that they can begin to discover some of these hidden aspects and hidden gems and these hidden purposes, and to connect with their soul, to connect with that divine spark. And when
To
it's
let
done
go.
truthfully, yeah, and let go, empty your cup. And when this is done truthfully and authentically, this inner journey leads to a profound transformation, a wondrous act of alchemy. That's the kind of exploration I'm talking, not to fill the hole, because the hole is an illusion. You're just looking in the wrong place. And once you go through that door, you'll start to discover that everything you needed was there all along. And you start
Yeah.
to not discover hidden connections or a new way of seeing or hearing or touching the light, the force, the God, whatever. You're just starting to remember that stuff, what that stuff is, and how to connect with that stuff.
Yeah. To surrender.
Yeah, yeah,
When we talk about surrender a lot on here, surrender isn't waving a white flag and giving up. It is to fully embrace all things as they are, including yourself. Self acceptance, self love are some of the most imperative tools you can have on this journey. In fact, I would say they're necessary because without those two things, you can lose yourself in the darkness. But as you cultivate these things, because it may start off small, but as you cultivate these things, the letting go of attachments becomes easier. Whether it's the materials, it's your status, or toxic relationships, the more you give yourself that compassion, that love, the more accepting you become of the world around you.
yeah.
Would you agree with that, or would you say those are two separate things now that I'm saying it out loud?
I'd say it's fine. It's fine what you said. If that is your personal path, if that's how you need to navigate, then I would say it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, because balance in all things, because too much of that is where my mind went when we have this. I mean, my new philosophy, and this is coming from someone who has always been a people pleaser, is I must be 51% selfish in my decisions and 49% selfless because I must always put myself first in my dealings.
That doesn't bother me. That doesn't offend me or the teachings or the temple. I think that's perfectly reasonable because there are those of us who aren't people pleasers and never have been people pleasers. I can tell you, I had to move myself a little further to the other way to learn how to still take care of myself and still be able to serve. But I had to bring myself a little closer away from self centeredness and more to the other way to find my balance, my harmony. And that's why I said, what you said, I said it's fine if that's the path that you need to walk in order to find that harmony and that balance. Who am I to say you're wrong? Who am I to discount that?
Right. Well, I think this ties into what we were talking about earlier, how everyone's path is different. I mean, one of the things I've always found fascinating about how well we've worked as student and teacher is we did kind of start on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And yes, I met you once you got closer to the center, but I don't know. I always thought that was really interesting about our relationship.
Well, that's because, when you surrender, and we're not surrendering all control. I got into a discussion today about that with another student of mine. Surrender isn't you surrender everything, but control also doesn't mean you control everything either. You have to find that center. But some of that requires surrender, and some of that requires letting go of our attachments to our ideas and our beliefs. Because not all of our beliefs that we acquire throughout our lifetime will always serve us well. Sometimes we outgrow them.
So, what would you say some good tools are for people beginning on this journey?
Well, I mentioned a few that we teach at the temple. Um, that have
Meditation.
always meditation, introspection, honest to God, taking a look at yourself with courage and knowing that you're going to find some things wrong with you. And I don't like to say it like that. I don't like to say there's something wrong with you. You're just discovering or rediscovering, I should say, very powerful parts of you through some of these practices. But
Domestication.
I like to use the basics, breath work. Sometimes it's meditation, sometimes it's not. A lot of the exercises that we share on this show, I use those when they're needed. But a lot of it is introspection because you really have to know what you're working with. And it goes back to the question, what are you looking for? What do you want?
Right. Well, I think an important one you touched on in there too that we haven't really discussed much, breath work. So, a lot of this behavioral conditioning we have gone through, what drives it is our nervous system. And our nervous system flares up in tense moments where we end up defaulting to these programs. And the reason breath work is so important is because through breath work, you can learn to sit in the present moment with your nervous system, breath work and mindfulness, to realize there are sensations going on in your body. One of the most powerful books I have ever read was called The Power of Now. And he talks about how there's ego and there's spirit, but there's actually a third part. It's called the pain body. And the pain body, the goal of the ego and the pain body is to make you see through their eyes, to make you identify with them. And your pain body is the accumulation of all the hard things you've gone through in life. And when our nervous system gets triggered, our brains are like clear water. And that emotion of anger, that red, it gets our brains touch that water and cast our minds into the color of that emotion. So through breath work, we can center ourselves into our body because we must feel it to process it, but we sit with the sensations in our body and don't allow our minds to be what takes hold. This is true ascending through our patterns because when we can stop letting this sequence of events within us keep triggering the same responses, when we can allow it to come up without judgment, without trying to rush it along, without negative emotions towards it, but love it, let it be there, sit with it, it'll start to dissipate. I mean, that's another big thing you hear in the healing community. You got to feel it to heal it. And that's exactly what this is. So often in my meditations, I will deal with some of the hard things I've been trying to work through, and I'll let the emotions come up: sadness, grief, anger, frustration. And I'll try to just sit with it in my body. I'll try not to let my mind go on a tangent. I'll try to keep my mind and my body separate. And I'll just allow that feeling to be there. And as I allow that to happen, and it can take some time, it'll start to loosen its grip on me. And then the next time I'm triggered with those emotions, it has less power over me because I'm working through it. So breath work and understand and learning to go inside your body is so imperative.
It is. You should get to know yourself, all of yourself, holistically. Your mind, body, spirit, your emotional body. And you can only do that when you take an honest look at yourself and you do this self reflection. And there are different ways to access that, as you said, with the breath work. That helps our mind and body kind of get to know each other. There's other ways that we seek to do this, and that is in the way we teach. One thing that's very important to us, the teachings that we teach at our temple we place a great importance on that inner awakening, but also at the center of that is the alignment with the universal energies of light of the universe. What this does when we start connecting to the flow and we start connecting consciously to this web of existence, students start to work toward a deeper understanding of their true nature, their authentic self, and their purpose in the world while they're here. Because interconnectedness is very important, that all sentience, all life, all phenomena, all of creation are interconnected and interdependent in this great universe, in this infinite universe, as far as I know.
I truly believe that. Well, and I mean, one thing that I'm going to touch on, I know we can go down a rabbit hole with this, the chakras, which is feeling things in your body. Your chakras are attuned to different parts of your life. There's energy flowing within you throughout from your head all the way down. And they align with different things in your life. And you will find many of the things stored are within those energies. And those are blockages stopping you from full connectedness with yourself and with the universe, with the force.
You're talking about the chakras. There is a wonderful book out there by a master, goes by his pen name is J.A. Michaels. He goes by Miko in the community. He's a wonderful teacher, but he wrote a book that talks about the energy centers and the chakras as it relates to the path of the Jedi and the how those things connect to the Force. The book is called Light of the Force: A Seeker's Guide. It's a very good book, and I would encourage you to read that. Your talk of the chakras really kind of reminded me of that.
And I think you've recommended that book to me before, ironically. Maybe that's synchronicity right there.
Right. It's a good one. You'll have to read it though. You can't just listen to it, I don't think.
I respect that. I've had a couple of those books. I'm like, oh no.
You actually have to read it.
I think another important thing we can do on this journey, as far as ways to help us progress as we're starting is to remove yourself from social media. There are algorithms that are trying to play to these old patterns within us, to detach from social media, to move away from negative influences, as we talked about before.
Hmm.
Sometimes you got to realize that you are a product of your environment as much as you are yourself. Sometimes you must remove yourself from situations so that you can allow yourself to grow. Because often when we start to grow, I ran into this. A lot of people won't want to see you progressing in life. They will be resistant because until they have their own aha moment, a lot of this stuff is going to seem unorthodox to them. And they'll try to bring you right back to the same type of lifestyle. When you spend your whole time people pleasing and you start saying no, people notice. I think another important thing is finding a community that's on the same journey you are. This was something that was imperative to me. Me and my fiance, we go to these full moon circles, which is nothing crazy or too woo woo. It is a whole bunch of singing bowls, getting a sound bath, and sharing some cacao and talking about our journeys with other people who are going on the same journey, sharing empowering words and also receiving that. Because you'd be amazed how many people share similar stories to you and are dealing with the same type of things in their shadows as you are.
All right.
Another important thing is, as we've talked about shadow work, again, we're going to dedicate a whole episode to actually going into this process. But shadow work is one of the most important things you can do in your life because shadow work is shining a light on the things hidden in your subconscious that drive and motivate you. And above all, I think, and this is something I struggled with at first, is finding a balance between spiritual growth and everyday life. Because it's so easy to get caught up in obsessing, but we must learn to still live, to work, to be in the moment. When we're too busy cramming knowledge, it's easy to lose so much information and not take in anything. We data dump it, as they say in the military.
Yeah. There's an axiom that touches upon something that you said regarding how others may try to kind of hold you back until they too can catch up to you. The axiom is, in developing yourself, others may come to misunderstand you. Endure this with patience, for this will pass. Because as we strive to grow and evolve and become the best version, the most authentic version of ourselves, it's not really that uncommon for others to perceive your changes as a negative thing or with misunderstanding or even skepticism. Skepticism's a big one. I remember, and we won't say who, but I remember when we first started training together, some people in your life, maybe one or two or a few or I don't know how many, but were really kind of skeptical about what you were doing, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But as you get past that, as you work through that skepticism and those misunderstandings, now on the other side of where you are now before where you started, do those same people still kind of come at you with skepticism, or have they seen your growth?
A handful of them still do, but it also was very diverging paths. But for the most part, I think many have not only seen the progress I've made, but have begun getting curious themselves.
Right. But also in the process, you attracted new people into your life,
Yeah.
right? These great people. You're getting married to one here very soon. So,
Well, we talk about vibration a lot. I mean, I do believe that and this might be a little too woo woo for people, but it's like before we start this journey, we were vibrating at a frequency. And yeah, that frequency might go down a bit as we start. But as we begin raising our vibrations, we do attract new people into our lives. People that are more,
in line with what you're trying to accomplish, right?
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. You have to endure this stuff with patience. Caterpillars don't just become butterflies, to borrow a metaphor you used before in a different show. They undergo a huge transformation inside that cocoon. Eventually, they become a butterfly. We have these periods of inner change that aren't really immediately evident or agreeable to others, and sometimes they'll never be agreeable to it. But along this path of change and betterment, you really got to do the best you can to be as open and honest about your intentions and the changes that you are seeking to perform. And this is where the new people come in. You may actually start to be surprised by the amount of support you receive and where that support comes from, because you do change hearts sometimes. And when you can't, and you're really not supposed to change all the parts. Sorry, you're not supposed to change all the hearts, because some have their path and you have your path. And when those paths come together, that's awesome. But when they split, that's okay too. That's part of this process. because that opens up space in their life for people who will be attracted to them for their path and that will be supportive and stuff. It's okay to lose people sometimes because you don't always lose them forever. Sometimes you lose them for a time until those paths intersect again.
It's so true, and it's one of the hard things I would say that I didn't quite realize that kind of ties into what you're talking about. When I first started going on this journey, I started seeing the truth. God, did I want to share that wisdom with everyone I could?
Right.
Man, most people don't want to hear
Well, we were talking
candidly.
about, we recorded, and this episode that I'm referencing will be out by the time you hear this. And it's part 3 of the agreements. And I talked about how most people don't like to hear about virtue. They don't like to hear about these inner values, these agreements that we talk about, because it forces them into a tough spot. It forces them to kind of take accountability and responsibility for their actions and the consequences of the ripples that they create. Because again, everything's interconnected, and every thought, every word, every action creates a ripple that creates consequences one way or the other, both good and bad. But to your point about how you started to find these new truths within, as you continue to practice and practice and practice the commitments, the self improvement, they will alter your perspective. They will create a new value system within you. They will create new priorities, which lead to shifts in behavior and in choices. And a lot of times you appear and you present as a new person, especially if someone is kind of in your life intermittently and they don't see you all the time. But this kind of change is very difficult to see up close anyway, because it happens in such a measured manner. The people that really notice are the people you don't talk to or see very often. So these changes can be puzzling to those who have grown accustomed to an old you, the old version of you. And that gets us off into a whole nother episode of a different show. But because really people like to have us where we were when they last met us. And that can create difficulties in those kind of relationships, especially with family, right? You haven't seen Aunt Jane in a long time, but all of a sudden you are like a different person. You look like she remembers. You might be a little bigger, but you're completely different inside and out. And that can be tough for people. And that's a very natural thing too. There's nothing really wrong with that. We just have to learn to adjust to that when it happens.
And the more authentically you're showing up in your life, the more authentically you're being, the less it will bother you, which takes time and cultivation. But you get to this point where it's like you either love me for who I am, or I'll let you show me the place you have in my life.
And if we can't coexist anymore because our paths are too far apart, just learn to be okay with that. Don't take it personal. There's another one of the 4 agreements. Don't take anything personal.
You know,
And that's really powerful too. But that's for another day. We should do a show on the 4 agreements on that book.
I think we need to do it. It was the
I mean, we
first book
kind
you
of do
ever
those
made me
shows
read.
every episode. We talk about it, but we should do a show on that. I think people would enjoy that.
I completely agree. I mean, it was the first book you ever had me read. Years before I even started being a student, it was the first book you had me read. That followed by The Way of the Peaceful Warrior.
Mm,
I still got that movie.
I love it. I love it.
Okay.
All right, so let's let's you have in our show notes here, living free. I am dying to hear what that means. What you consider to be living free.
Put me on the spot right there. So, when I think of living free, it's authentically living is the simplest way to put it. When we are living our truth, when we are no longer trying to wear masks in the world to get by and find validation. When we start validating ourselves and our experiences, when we start loving ourselves, when we can speak our minds without judgment of ourselves when we do so. And again, this is a process, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And I believe that is what living free is. It is no longer being restricted by the shackles of your conditioning. It is finding joy and fulfillment in everyday life. It is following a path that excites you. It is doing what brings you joy and not what brings everybody else joy. Because I was one of those people where I would just go with the flow because I'd rather not make waves. Now, if this is something that's important to me, I will make waves. And so I guess to me, that's what living free is.
I am going to quote another axiom on this. This mostly sums up what I mean by when I say living free. One who walks the path of light does so with acceptance and contentment, free of conflict. The one who walks the path of light does so with a heart open to acceptance and contentment. In the gentle embrace of these virtues, conflict finds no fertile ground to take root. For our knights, the Luminari, walking the path of light signifies living in accordance with truth, virtue, and inner wisdom. It involves embracing the natural order of things, finding contentment in the simplicity of being. Such a way of life is characterized by acceptance rather than resistance. Conflict often arises from resistance to what is, to attachments, to desires, and attempts to control or manipulate everything. When we walk the path of light, there is an understanding that the ebb and flow of life are beyond our control, and true contentment is found in acceptance of the present moment. By releasing the need for conflict and control, we open ourselves to the serenity of living in harmony with the force. When you are in tune with life and the natural patterns in the universe and within every living thing, you will start to understand the why of the people and things around you. Lines in our code, well, are really our whole code: emotion yet peace, passion yet serenity, chaos yet harmony, death yet the force. In this state of serenity, you will walk the path of life with grace and ease, illuminating your way and casting a luminous glow upon the lives of those fortunate enough to journey alongside of you. Your path is chosen, not given. Everything you do should be with purpose and intention. Take responsibility for the consequences of your good and bad choices. Learn from both. Have faith in your ability to walk with grace, as each day will offer trials. When you ask for patience, difficulties will be presented to you. When you ask for courage, you will be given opportunities to be brave. When you seek hope, you will be given a chance to bring this to others in need. I will also add this: free yourself and others from expectations that none of us can ever meet. Love without expectation, love without condition. Do all of these things without expectations and condition, and you will find peace, but you also find freedom.
Well, that was good. Man, at the ready.
I'm a machine gunner, man.
Through that, I have an exercise for all of you. I want you to make a list of all of your beliefs, as many as you can possibly list. I love my family. I want to do good by others. Make a list of every belief you have. And then, once you finish this list, right next to it, is this a personal truth or is this a program belief that came from somewhere else? Begin to identify what is your authentic self and what is your program self.
And sometimes those might be the same thing, just to point that out. Not all programming is bad.
Well said. Thank you for your time and listening to the new Ashla podcast. Ad Lucian.
And with love and gratitude, ad lucem.